Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for discussions from Drinko Hall. Today we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. Passed in Congress on June 4th, 1919, the 19th Amendment guaranteed all women the right to vote. I'm honored to be here with our esteemed moderator and guests as we commemorate this storied amendment. I would be remiss not to acknowledge that African American women in the South and throughout the country continued to face tremendous obstacles to voting despite the ratification of the 19th Amendment. It was not until August 1965 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that we continued to work on racial discrimination in voting. Here at the College of Law, diversity and inclusion continues to be a core value. Beginning this year, the college is instituting mandatory diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice training for all Moritz faculty and staff. And we pledge to devote significant resources to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice at our college. We are proud to share that our incoming class is comprised of 60% women, a record-breaking percentage. We have come a long way, but there is more that needs to be accomplished. Conversations like the one we're having today continue to move us forward. I'm delighted that Erin Moriarty and our esteemed panelists, Sally Bloomfield, Janae Stevens, and our very own Professor Ruth Eckler were able to join us today. We're grateful to have a 9-time Emmy award-winning news journalist and Moritz alum moderating our virtual conversation. Erin will introduce and interview each panelist and then open up the session for questions. Please feel free to write any questions to one or all the panelists in the Q&A section at any time. And so with that said, let me introduce Erin Moriarty and get things started. Erin is a double Buckeye, earning her undergraduate BA in 1973 and then graduating from the Moritz College of Law in 1977. Her reporting has earned her virtually every major journalism award available. In 2019, she was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Alliance for Women in the Media Foundation. And in addition to her 9 Emmy Awards, she has 3 Gracie Awards. This past year, Erin became host of a new crime podcast, My Life of Crime. If you haven't had the chance to listen to it, I highly encourage you to check it out. With her many accomplishments and limited free time, Erin never fails to answer the call of her alma mater to share her time and talent with us. We're incredibly grateful to have her with us today. Please join with me in welcoming Erin Moriarty.
Thanks so much, Dean Davies. The law school means a great deal to me, and so I'm always here when you need me. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's a morning to feel very optimistic about the place of women in this world. Here's the front page, kind of a messed up front page of the New York Times. And here you have Kamala Harris, an attorney, the first Black woman, the first Asian American woman to be nominated for Vice President of the United States. It was a great way to wake up this morning. And if you have been following the last 3 days of the Democratic National Convention, then you saw an amazing array of powerful women. Michelle Obama, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Gretchen Whitmer, Nancy Pelosi. It's an exciting time, but at the same time, when I was reading the Times this morning, there was a headline that says, an unusual pressure on a running mate because she's a woman. And we can't lose sight of the fact that with all the advancements that women have made, there is still a significant wage gap between women and white men. White women are typically paid just 79 cents for every dollar paid to a white man. Black women, 62 cents. Latinas, 54 cents. What do we do to change that? How do we work together to make sure that we improve the prospects for all women? Well, we're lucky to have on this panel 3 incredible women to talk about some of these issues. We have Sally Bloomfield. She's the class of 1969 at Ohio State and was the only woman to graduate in her class. She was only the 2nd woman, and she was the youngest to be appointed commissioner of the Public Utilities Commission in Ohio, and then later served as chair. Ruth Eckler is a member of the Harvard law class of 1981 and is one of the leading scholars in the areas of constitutional law and disability discrimination. And Janae Stevens, who graduated just 7 years ago from Ohio State, has been named by the National Black Lawyers as one of the top 40 under 40 lawyers in Ohio. Her expertise is employment law. So as we hear from these women, feel free to send in questions. I'll get to as many as we can. And if there's one person you specifically want to answer, let us know that too. So I'm going to start with Sally. As I mentioned, she was the only woman to graduate in her class. Her expertise was the male-dominated field of public utilities and energy law. Besides her work at the PUCO, she was the first woman to make partner at Ricker and Eckler, and she has spent 2 decades at the Franklin County Convention Facilities Authority, serving as chair twice. And here's a fun fact, which I love. She and her son, David, who's also a Moritz grad, were the only mother and son to serve as president, although a few years apart, of the Columbus Bar Association. So I'm going to start with you, Sally. I couldn't get over the fact that you were the only person, only female to graduate in your class. It had to be incredibly lonely. How would you describe your experience in law school? Even when I was there, we only have one bathroom. I mean, what was your experience like?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm very humbled to be in the company of these talented women, and thank you very much for including me. Actually, I would characterize my law school experience as pretty normal by today's standards. Even 50 plus years ago, I was not made to feel uncomfortable either by my professors or my classmates. I was in a close-knit study group where I was really treated as one of the guys. And that experience really enriched my law school experience. I was included in most of the student activities, even the softball team. The only thing that I can recall that was a liability for being a woman law student was because I was ineligible to join the law school's legal fraternity. And that's about it. I had an amazing experience, and I did not experience real discrimination during law school at all. And I look back on those days with a lot of happiness and a lot of fond memories.
Okay, that actually surprises me a great deal. I'm curious, then when you went on to the law firm, you were, if I'm correct, only one of 2 women in the law firm. Did you feel that you had to work longer, work harder, just to be considered one of the guys?
Somewhat. That's true, and I did. I had really good experiences with the law firm. I did get off to sort of a rocky start when I went there, because initially I was assigned to a firm mentor who basically just tolerated me rather than being helpful. However, the second mentor that I had was really supportive, sat me down, told me what was what, and pushed me towards partnership. I had been fortunate when I left the Public Utilities Commission as a commissioner to be known by people in the regulatory field, and thus I was able to attract clients. And I was not dependent upon others in the firm to send me work, which turned out to be a real plus. Because the people came to me because of my background, my revenue numbers were good, and I think that's what got me into the partnership, because my hours were never great. I always had a hard time making hours, and I think I think having a family was part of it, and a variety of other things. But I did, at that time at the firm, hours were really pressed upon, and I frequently felt guilty because I didn't make the hours. When I was working after business hours in the evenings a lot, and on weekends, I felt to make those billable hours, I felt guilty for not being at home with my family. But then when I was home with my family and I realized I hadn't made my hours for that particular period, I felt guilty for being with them and not at work. So that was sort of a constant pressure. Today, thank heavens, I think a lot of that pressure has dissipated, because of remote working and because male attorneys have also recognized the need for the work-life balance. Another pressure, and you alluded to it, Erin, was I did feel that I had to perform at a higher level than my male counterparts based on a need to prove myself. And also, I wanted to pave the way for other women.
And I want to get to that work-life balance, because I think that's one of the toughest things for women who are practicing law. But let me move on to Ruth right now. God, we have so many things we could talk about. I want to introduce Ruth. I didn't give you enough of a detail. She's the Distinguished University Professor and the Heck Faust Memorial Chair in Constitutional Law. She is the author of 16 books, with a new one coming entitled The Public Insult Playbook. At Harvard, where she went for both undergraduate and law school, she was a college athlete. She co-founded the Committee on Gay and Lesbian Legal Issues and served as editor on what was then called the Harvard Women's Law Journal. It's now the Journal of Law and Gender. She is a passionate advocate focusing on Title IX issues, gender and sexual orientation equality, and disability laws. And she's also a volunteer lawyer for the ACLU. She brought some of those first HIV/AIDS cases and is serving her third term on the ACLU's national board. Ruth, I want to ask you, just because what Sally said, I saw a discussion you had once, and you described your law school experience sometimes as hostile.
Unfortunately, that is true. Not 100% of the time, obviously. I made a lot of really dear friends when I was in law school. I was a little surprised by the hostility because, as you said in your intro, I went to Harvard for college, and I just perceived myself as crossing the street to go to law school, so I didn't really think of it as a big change in my life. But when I was in law school, 25% of the class was female. And that may not sound awful, but it means when you're sitting in a room, probably the person in front of you and the person on both sides of you is a man, and it makes it feel, you know, a very male dominated. And there were no women teaching in the first year of the law school on the regular faculty at Harvard when I was there. So in the spring, when we could choose one class, I chose constitutional law as my elective, and Martha Field was teaching it as a visitor from the University of Pennsylvania. And there were more women in that class than in my other classes. I think a lot of people made that choice that I made. But I was so struck when a woman was in the front of the classroom, how disrespectful many of my male peers were. And my most memorable memory, and I don't remember that much from those years, it's been a while, right, was she said something, she asked a question, and a man raised his hand, she called on him, and he said, "If I would take you seriously," and then he proceeded to answer the question. And I've never hissed, I'm not like a hisser. And I was sitting among a lot of my female friends in the classroom, we could pick our own seats, and spontaneously, we all went, hiss, because we were just so shocked. And so there are a number of things that happened, graffiti on the Women's Law Journal door. And I mean, there were some really awful incidents, but that incident just showed me how some of the men felt and how they just weren't going to respect her. And she was a former Supreme Court clerk, is currently on the Harvard Law faculty. You know, she was an incredible person, very talented, but that wasn't enough for those people.
Certainly builds a thick skin. I was also curious, before you came to Ohio State, and actually before you went to Tulane, you had been focused mainly on race and gender discrimination, but then you began to focus on disability. Why?
Well, I was at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division from 81 to 85 under Reagan, and then I left when he was reelected for a second term. I decided I didn't want 4 more years of being in the Reagan Justice Department. And as you know, I accepted a position at Tulane Law School then. And when I moved to Louisiana with my female partner, I realized that we were criminals in the eyes of the state of Louisiana. A very harsh penalty for engaging in sodomy, 20 years. Not that anyone had been convicted, but still that stops you, right? It makes you think. So I decided to volunteer with the ACLU of Louisiana to try to help them overturn the state sodomy statutes and be involved in gay rights issues. But that was when the HIV crisis struck. And all of a sudden, people were scrambling to help men who were being fired from their jobs because they were perceived to be HIV positive merely because they were gay. And so I started doing some of that early work, as you mentioned in the introduction. And the only tool we had was a state anti-discrimination statute that no one had ever used because HIV was arguably a disability. And Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which also prohibits disability discrimination. But there was no Americans with Disabilities Act yet, because that was the 80s. That wasn't passed till 1990. So I got in on the ground floor, having the privilege of losing some AIDS cases, but settling some also. And then was able to help work with some people to get the necessary language in the ADA that would allow it to be a tool for dealing with people who are HIV positive.
It's really interesting to me with Sally, with you, and I think it's going to be true of Janae too, is that I think women, even though there are a larger number of women going to law school, we feel this obligation to do something bigger than just in our lives, that we do become advocates. So I'm going to go to Janae on this. Our third panelist, of course, is Janae Stevens. She's a first-generation college student. I'm very touched by that. She graduated from the University of Nevada, came to Columbus for law school. Someday I want to know why you came to Columbus from Nevada, and graduated from Moritz in 2013. She began as an employment law litigator at Dinsmore, and then she moved to Voorhees 2 years ago. She serves on the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee and is chair of the Voorhees Diversity Network. She's president of the John Mercer Langston Bar Association and was elected to the Columbus Bar Association Board of Governors. And if that isn't enough, she was also appointed by the mayor to serve on his working group that is trying to develop a civilian review board. Janae, so glad you're here. I'm just kind of curious. Some of us older lawyers, we were inspired by Perry Mason, not the one that's on HBO, the original Perry Mason, to become lawyers. What made you want to become a lawyer?
Thank you. I really appreciate being offered or included in this conversation. I think that there are two things that I look at that influenced my decision to go to law school. And I'd say the first is my family. From the earliest of childhood memories, I can remember grandparents, parents communicating to me that education was the key to access, and that was the thing that would keep me moving and keep me pushing ahead and pushing into spaces where maybe I didn't think or didn't believe that I could go into. And so I think all of those folks, that foundation of my family, got me to the point of saying that this is possible. I would say the second thing would be a little bit of my own stubbornness. So when I looked around, my hometown, I didn't see Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black teachers, Black bankers. I mean, anything, any profession that you can think of, that just was not part of my worldview. And I looked at that and said, why not? Why can I not be in this space, and why don't I have a place here? And so I think I wish I had some, this is why I chose law school, but it was really about, I don't see people here and we should be here. And it's important for us to be here. And so that really, the combination of those two things, I think, pushed me to go to law school.
Janae, you make a very, very good point. In some ways, Sally was a trailblazer, being the only woman to graduate from her class, but you're a trailblazer as well. Your law school, unlike your law school class, unlike the rest of ours, was pretty much even male-female, right? But you don't describe the class as diverse, do you? I mean,
So,
what aren't law schools and law firms doing to be more diverse?
I think when we look at single buckets, women, men, or however we're classifying the particular area of diversity that we're looking at, we're not yet to the point where we're also considering the issue of intersectionality. And okay, we've got maybe a good diversity or a good mix of men and women, but do we have enough Black women? Do we have an adequate amount of Black men or Hispanic women or disabled women or men, whatever the case might be here? I think that I would say the class was diverse. It certainly looked different than I imagine all of your classes looked. but I would like to continue to push that narrative or push that issue of we've got to make sure we're continuing to get diverse students in multiple categories at the table as well. And I think, this year I've heard really great things in terms of, my space is the John Mercer Langston Bar Association. So that's very much connected with the Black Law Students Association there at Moritz. And I've heard great things about the number of incoming Black law students at the college this year. And that's encouraging to me. And it's something that I'm really, really excited about, and was very excited to hear that there was a great amount of success there.
And I want to, I'll start with you, Janae, but I also am curious with Ruth as well. What Sally had said, that she really felt she had to work harder and longer and felt guilty if she didn't, just to be accepted as a lawyer in a firm, just to be seen as a lawyer. Did you run into that, Janae, or were people a little more advanced by it? Because I think men have children and are more interested in raising children, or did you still feel that kind of pressure?
Right or wrong, my personal view on it is I work twice as hard and sometimes get half as much. And so that is just something that had been ingrained in me from the time that I was a little kid. And I think I feel a tremendous amount of pressure at a law firm, being one of very few, that I have to set the example. I have to be able to be credible. I have to be very good, not for just the reasons of wanting to be good, but so that every other person that looks like me that comes behind me has an equal opportunity, and that they get the chances that they deserve and that they need to be great. And so absolutely, I think that the level of work that I expect of myself is greater than that I expect of my peers.
And Ruth, did you also feel that same kind of pressure? And do you continue to feel that or not once you've attained a certain amount of knowledge and skill in a particular field? You don't have to worry about it as much.
I do think it gets easier as you get older. Sally might agree with that you do get to walk into the classroom with a lot of gray hair, which I think gives you some respect. But I don't think I'll ever forget that the male students' response to Martha Field. Like, that's like always in the back of my head, that some of them may be sitting in this room and I have to work twice as hard to gain their respect. And there's all the little things that happen to us as women, which is a little different, but I feel like more people come to my office hours, more people send me emails, more people expect me to always be available, because women are that way. And so I think sometimes we have to work harder because of the additional expectations on us. And women are still a minority on the law faculty, not as much as they were when I first started law teaching, but as the people organize this know, every time they want to put something together and they want a woman on the panel, they have to think about whether they want to ask me one more time, and so I think that hasn't yet changed. It's great to have 60% females in our entering class, and so maybe someday the law professor world will also be 50% female. The associates in law firms will also be 50% female, but we're not there yet. So there is still a modest minority status that we have to experience, which does cause us to have to work more because people want to include us. They want to be diverse. Right? That's the double-edged sword with diversity. And I'm sure for someone like Janae, it's even harder because people always want the Black woman, right? And there just aren't that many to choose from. And we all have to be sensitive to that. We want to be inclusive, but we don't want to be over pressuring the people who bring diversity to our ranks.
I mean, Janae, do you sometimes feel this? I know it happens in my office where unfortunately the young Black woman has to speak for all Black issues, as if there's a monolith out there and everyone turns to you. And you have this pressure that is just incredibly unfair.
Quite a bit. But I have, I think, taken the position that I will qualify any statement that I have. So this is my opinion, or this is my experience, as opposed to everyone's experience, because it is different. Even within the Black community, my experience is not the same as another Black associate. We might have similarities. We might go through things that we can relate to one another, but they are different. And so I think it's important to not lock into one voice, one Black voice, or one woman's voice, and try to spread that around so you get a better perspective, a more holistic perspective as well.
I mean, and Sally, this is probably more for you and Janae. You seem to have a pretty good experience through law school and going to the law firm and becoming a partner, but weren't there some clients who just didn't want a female lawyer? I mean, didn't you have to deal with that?
I did. And I can remember, fortunately, not in the regulatory world, because most of the people that were clients already were familiar with me because of being on the commission. However, I remember vividly, I was assigned a project by somebody in the firm, and I started working on it, and all of a sudden, the project was yanked from me with no explanation. And I found out later, and I had to do asking and whatever, tiptoeing around to try to figure out. I thought I had done something wrong. Well, it turned out that the client just didn't want a woman attorney working on his project. So that's been a long time ago, and I think I don't see that at all today, but it did exist.
What about for you, Janae? Now you're in employment law. I don't know whether that makes a difference, but have you, whether you know about it or not, are some of the partners in the firm worried that their clients won't want to work with a young woman?
Luckily, that has not been my experience. It certainly, I've heard others have that experience, but it's not been my experience, at least knowingly. I'm sure that there are, I think I actually experienced more instances where clients, because of the particular type of case that I'm handling in the employment space, they want a Black woman, or they want a woman on a particular case, if it's a sexual harassment case or a race discrimination case. And that comes with its own unique challenges and conversations that happen behind the scenes. But I have actually experienced that more often. At least I've not known that anyone has said, I don't want you because you're a woman or because you're a Black woman.
Sarah, I'd love to have all of you. I think Sally too. Is there one instance of real discrimination that has stayed in your head that has really marked your life that you've run into? I'll start with Sally, go to Ruth and Janae. Anything that?
I would say for me, there are two instances of discrimination because I was a professional woman that have stayed with me for an awful long time. One of them involved the law school. And it occurred when my husband and I, when we graduated law school, worked in New York City for each of us for big 8 accounting firms. And at that time, the deanship was switching. And they had selected a person, a new dean from NYU. So the alums in New York were well in advance, like 3 or 4 months in advance of a reception, were invited to attend. And I responded that I would. And the day of the event, I go up to the Pan Am Club and was greeted by a group of people right there. They were as if they were waiting for me, which they were. And they started fumbling all over themselves and said, well, we're really very sorry, but you can't come into this reception because the Pan Am Club does not permit women in where we're having the reception. They did have me, they introduced me to the dean. And I'll tell you, I was sort of in a shock because that had never happened to me before. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. I was totally embarrassed and totally humiliated and very glad to leave immediately. That was one thing that happened. The second thing that I remember was once I was a commissioner, there were various speeches that I was invited to give, and one of them was at the Columbus Club. And I go to the speech. It was a zip up the front door, which is I wasn't not familiar with the Columbus Club at all, and knocked on the door. And I was greeted by a representative who said, "Oh, I'm awfully sorry, but you can't come in. You have to use the side door." And so, and again, and I'm amazed. you know, the people that were putting on the event and wanted me as the guest speaker hadn't even thought of that or whatever. Anyway, so I went ahead and gave the speech. At the time, I was about 8 months pregnant with my second child. And so when I was introduced, to make matters worse, I was introduced with the comment, oh, please don't have your child now, and all kinds of comments about my pregnancy, which I couldn't believe. Fast forward about 10, 15 years later, Ambassador Jean Kilpatrick, who was the brother of a Voorhees attorney at the time, came to town to give a speech. And her brother, I don't understand why he did this, but he had her meet him at the Columbus Club. She does the same thing that I did. She goes up to the front door, knocks on, and had the same reception. Sorry, you can't come in this way. You'll have to go along the side. The paper, fortunately, the newspaper got a hold of that and publicized it the next day. You know, and the comment from the Columbus Club people was, oh, well, that was some big mistake. We've never done that. We'd never do that, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. But I will have to say they changed their policy fairly quickly after that. First of all, women were admitted. And secondly, I don't think they have the front door business anymore. But that,
What about you, Ruth? Oh, we got to unmute.
I wasn't going to mention it, but my second year of law school, when you do interviews with firms, a firm brought me to Seattle and put me up in a club where I too could only enter by the side door and couldn't use the restaurant. And I made the mistake of having my stockings actually rip, and I couldn't buy any stockings in their little gift shop. But I had forgotten about that, Sally. So I guess those clubs were common in those days. But my most memorable experience, which probably helped shape some things in my life, was when I was interviewed at Tulane Law School for an assistant professor position in 1985. The dean looked at my resume, which I think was pretty good. And he says, oh, I see you do feminist theory. Do you do anything else that might be useful? And I was just like, oh my God, this is the dean. This is how he's thinking of my candidacy. He's erased my 4 years of work at the Department of Justice, where I won awards for my work and I had published already. And, I had done some good stuff. And all he could see was, she's a feminist. So therefore we discount her. Now, he was fortunately the outgoing dean. And so I was assured when I was offered the position by the chair of appointments that he was the outgoing dean, and I would get a more positive reception by the next dean, who was not named. So I didn't, wasn't quite sure about that. So I come there with an acting dean who was very kind to me, and had to then meet with the promotion and tenure committee for the first time to be told what the rules are, for getting tenure. And I'm a pretty confident person. I figured I could handle that, right? And I go to this meeting and they hand me this list of law journals, and they say, these are the top 20 law journals. We expect you to publish in those law journals. If you want to get tenure, that's what you have to do. And I look at this list and I say, well, I write about women's rights and none of them have ever published anything on that topic. And they look at me and they say, well, I guess that's your problem. And I was like, okay, you clearly are setting me up for failure. I mean, that's your expectation. And one of the men on the faculty told me shortly after I was hired, I think he thought he was being nice. He said, at the faculty meeting where we voted to hire you, I mentioned that you're a woman. I was like, oh, okay, great. I guess you noticed, right? So I guess my gender was a discussion point when I was hired as one of the first women on the Tulane law faculty. But I'm a competitive person. You mentioned that I have a history in athletics. So to me, that was just more reason to prove them wrong. And then I very quickly ended up publishing in the top 20 law journals, more than any of them ever had, it turned out, and got tenure fairly easily and fairly quickly. But that's just not a good way to gain entrance to a job, to basically be told, we hired you, right? But we don't think you're going to succeed.
Janae, I'm curious whether you've encountered discrimination, but also whether you encounter it more as a woman or as a Black woman.
Sure. So the one story or incident that comes most immediately to mind is actually while I was interviewing it would have been between my first summer at Dinsmore and deciding whether I wanted to return or what I was going to do for that second summer. And I was interviewing with another law firm, luckily not here in Columbus, but in a neighboring state. And the interview was going fantastic. The firm had a ton of really talented Black women lawyers at the time, and just Black lawyers generally that I really connected with a lot of other lawyers that I had met throughout the day. And I got to it was actually a weekend long interview. So it was like a Friday night and a Saturday kind of activity. And I had gotten to the last interview, and it was two white gentlemen who were interviewing me, one probably a little bit older and one a junior partner. And we're having a great conversation. And the older gentleman at one point just turned to me and asked me with a straight face what I would do if a client called me the N-word. And he said it repeated. I mean, he said the word repeatedly, just like he wanted to say it in that space for whatever reason. And I don't quite remember what transpired after and what conversation we had, but I do remember the word being used no fewer than 5 or 6 times during that exchange. And whatever I responded or however I responded, it must have been good enough because I did get an offer for that law firm. And I remember feeling really torn because I met a lot of really great lawyers that I was excited about working with. And I thought that there was a great opportunity there. But at the end of the day, I just did not feel welcome. It wasn't a place, in my head, is this something your clients do often? Do you expect that your clients will be asking me these questions? Do you expect that your clients will be using this terminology to me? And so I ultimately turned it down and had to have a couple of difficult conversations with some of the folks who were recruiting me from that firm as to why. Why did I turn down the offer? And at the time, being a law student in need of a job, trying to build a reputation, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell the firm. I didn't tell really anyone other than family or really trusted friends, probably for a good couple of years, because I didn't know how I'd be perceived for having lived that experience. And so I would say in that instance, I know that they were asking me the question because I was Black, but I don't know if they were asking me that question because I was a woman. I have no idea. I don't know if they would have asked the same question to a Black man.
I started this discussion talking about the disparity in income between women and white men primarily. And I will start with you, Janae. I've been reading studies. I haven't seen a real recent one, but the most recent one still said that female lawyers make about 60% of what the men do, and while the numbers have increased in the equity partnership, it's still not where it should be. And you had mentioned before this something about that and I don't know whether it's connected to this, why often or larger numbers of young Black lawyers, women, will leave before white women. And why is that?
I don't have all the answers. I only have, what folks have shared with me and what I think folks, write about and what they, make suggestions about. And I think a lot of it comes down to not having people to look up to, right? There are so few Black women who hold spaces of equity partner or partner that when you look up and you see no one that looks like you, it becomes very difficult to believe that your experience will be any different. And so, I think the number is somewhere, Black partners is south of, I think it's like 1.8% of partners in large law firms are Black. And then when you look at Black women, it's 0.75%. And I think that study was done in 17 or 18, so that the numbers are a little old there, but I can't imagine that we're much further along. And so when I see that, or when I hear that, my most immediate response is, why do I think I will be any different than what the statistics are telling me is going to happen? either I will opt out or I will be forced out. And that's not an indictment or anything about my current employer, any employer. I think it's just the reality of these are the stats. And I would say not a lack of sponsorship, a lack of true direction as to, when am I going to be promoted to partner? How am I going to do it? How does that actually work for someone like me that doesn't look like the lawyers in this law firm? I would say, not getting, I think as young, when I look at some of my, peers that are a few years younger, are they getting the right opportunities? I think I have been really fortunate that I have gotten a lot of really great work, but that's not the case for all associates of color. And so when you're looking at law firms, how is work being assigned? How are we checking that folks are getting a good experience? And how do we know that their responses to our questions are authentic? Are we giving them a space to both be successful and tell us when there's a problem? So I think there's a number of different things, but I would say largely relationships and sponsorship.
Hey, and Sally, you made me think of something. You had started at the PUCO before you went to Bricker, am I correct?
Yes.
Is that good for all women? This idea of coming to a law firm with an expertise, with something that other people don't have and they need you for. Would you say that that's good advice for young lawyers?
Absolutely. And I used to
did that too as well.
And I used to give that advice to to women lawyers. I'd say, you get into the regulatory field, work for a few years, get your expertise, and then you'll be qualified, and people will not look at, you'll have a foot up to get into it because of your expertise. And that was certainly the case when I was starting out. I was able to secure a job at the Public Utilities Commission, primarily through my dad, who knew one of the commissioners, and they offered me a position there. And at the time, I think I was the only woman attorney in the organization. Fortunately, it changed over time while I was there, and there were more and more women attorneys that were hired, and they got the same type of expertise that I did. And I found that also in the environmental area, that this was a good way for women who are interested in environmental law to finish with the state in some capacity and then move over into a law firm. The people that I graduated with, and I knew colleagues that were ahead and behind me, in Columbus at least, a lot of them were not hired at that time by any law firm. They had to go in. I remember specifically a woman who had to go to banking and be a banker because she couldn't get a position. So in the law field. So with an expertise, that definitely gave me a foot up, and I watched the people also at the PUCO, the other women, and it was the same was true with them. Well,
I can remind everyone here that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who graduated first in her class at Columbia, admittedly it was 1958-59, but could not get hired, and finally Rutgers hired her. But it's astounding when you think about that, the mind that woman and the great physical strength that woman has. Ruth, what would you say? So I think is there some advice you'd have for women who want to go into teaching? And I mean, are those numbers more even in law schools or not? Is there still the same kind of disparities?
Well, there's way more women on the tenure track now than there were when I started. I mean, I remember when I was on the job market in 1985, one law school that was recruiting me was desperately recruiting me to become the second woman on their faculty. And the lone woman on the faculty was on the phone to me a lot, trying to convince me to accept their offer. But the idea of being the second woman to me wasn't a plus factor, right? I wanted to be someplace where more women had already been. So I think it's always hard to be the first or the second. And Sally, I can't imagine what it would have been like to be the one woman in a classroom of 180 or however many people were in your class in those days. you know, to be a law professor, the most important thing is that you've written and you've published and that you have an academic record. And there are more and more women interested in that. And now some people get PhDs before they try to become a law professor. And it's always been the case, a lot of women are in PhD programs. So that path is not a path, I think, that's restrictive to women. But, you know, it takes time, and it takes a lot of time for your studies to extend beyond law school to include a PhD these days. And certainly a lot of women who are trying to have children and want to have families, you know, that's a long haul in your 20s, 30s, you know, when you might be having children. And I know we've mentioned that before, but I think that's always the challenge for women, is the timing question, right? If we want to have children, when can we finally do that? When is there the space to do that? When can you be 8 months pregnant and not have someone totally discount your value? And so that will never change so long as women are the only ones who become pregnant. So I think that's the other consideration for women. If they do want to have families, if they want to have families by themselves giving birth to children, it's not something men can do at this point. You know, how do they balance that? That I think hard to imagine that will stop being a challenge anytime soon.
I do want to make sure I get some of the questions that are coming from those who are watching this. And one of them is really interesting to me, and I would love all of your comments on this. Do we need the ERA? You know, it was pretty dead. And now it seems to be possibly coming back alive, although there will be a battle whether it's too late and whether it will have to be, again, ratified by, you know, all the states again. But anyway, what are your thoughts? I'm going to start with you, Janae. What do you think? Do we need the Equal Rights Amendment?
So I'm actually going to defer here.
Okay.
To Colker, given that I'm sure she is looking at this with a far different lens than I am. So I'm going to take a step back here and defer to her.
You want to answer that, Ruth?
Well, I mean, the question is, what would it mean? And the short answer, it might mean that gender discrimination gets what we call strict scrutiny into the Constitution, which is the highest level of consideration. But ironically, strict scrutiny in recent years hasn't been such a blessing in the race discrimination area. It's actually allowed white men to challenge affirmative action for Blacks. And so when I was at the Justice Department in the early 80s, we were instructed to try to put the United States in a post-ERA posture as if the ERA had been ratified. And so I think that in many ways, that's what has happened in recent years, that the level of scrutiny attached to gender discrimination is at this point significantly high. And I'm not sure it would make a big difference, but maybe symbolically it would feel good. I mean, there's always that, right? That sometimes it just feels good to have recognition, even if it doesn't actually meaningfully make that much of a difference. I don't think it would make a huge difference at this point. But, you know, I'm happy to be stand corrected on that prediction.
Do you have a thought on that, Sally?
Actually, I would agree with everything that Ruth said.
All right. And then now and I'm going to throw this at you, Janae. Unfortunately, you're getting stuck with a lot of these questions because you're the youngest of us and you're really going through what's going on now. Well, so one of the spectators, people watching, said, haven't we moved past this thing where we have to work harder? Aren't we being recognized? Women have value and certain traits that men don't have, and is that being recognized now? I mean, you may drive yourself, but do you feel that women are being valued now in a law firm specifically because they are women? It sounds like, particularly in your field, you may be.
I think that there has been a lot of growth, right? Even just in the small time that I've been in law firms, when you look up and you see there are a lot more women sitting at the table today than there were when I started, you know, after I graduated 7 years ago. And so I think that value and an understanding of the value that women can bring in those settings is certainly being recognized. I think that there is a lot of good that has come, but there's still a lot of good we can do, would be my perspective.
And there was another question. I thought I got this beforehand, and I think it's a very good question. As women in the law, because all three of you have been trailblazers in your own way, and you've been advocates. How do you balance individual growth, just caring about yourself, your own advancement at work, while pushing for systematic change for everyone? Is there a balance, or do those come together? That was the question. I'll go with you, Ruth.
I'm someone who has been very successful despite my lack of instrumentality, I guess. I mean, I have always done what I loved. I've always written about the topics that most interest me. I've always refused to take advice about what I should be doing. The idea that I would join a law faculty in '85 and at first mostly published in the area of feminist legal theory was not something people were like, oh, just write about civil procedure, which I was teaching then. You know, you could do something very conventional, very doctrinal, you know some rules that need to be changed. I was like, nah, doesn't interest me. So I've always felt that if I just did what I have a passion for doing, that would lead to success. And so in my case, I've always wanted to advance civil rights. It's just something I've been wanting to do since I was about 4 years old. So it's been a while. And so as if I say often give people, instead of being instrumental, do where your passion lies. I just think we're all a bunch better and more successful if we do things that really we care about. So that's what I've done. It's, for me, there's been no disconnect between being successful professionally and doing what I love, because doing what I love has allowed me to be successful professionally.
But Sally, you mentioned though that you felt this, you had to be thinking about women coming after you, that was in the back of your mind. I mean, did you feel that you had to put aside some of the things you wanted to do simply because you had to be this trailblazer and open up the door for other women?
I wouldn't say that so much as I just felt that I had to try to be better, and I had to encourage and people did come and ask questions and want advice, and I tried to encourage women. And I do remember being very upset, if you want to call it that, when there was a time, I don't know if you're familiar with the term queen bee, but about 15 years ago, it seems there was a lot of literature about queen bees. And queen bees were professional women who had clawed their way to the top. And by gum, if they were at the top, they didn't want anybody, they want to make it as tough as possible for the women behind them. And I know that I was totally frosted by that concept, but I did watch it and I did see that it happened on occasion. I think for the most part, that queen beeism is pretty well gone, thank heavens. But I just took the opposite point of view, that you wanted to help people, but I won't say that I did specific measures to try to pave the way, other than to try to, when I was asked to do anything, I tried to do it the very best way I could so that people coming behind me would not be precluded from being asked.
Janae, I wonder if you feel those pressures. You know, I didn't practice law a long time, but I worked for a law firm, a small law firm, and I was the only woman. And unfortunately, when I left to become a journalist, they never hired another woman because they told me afterwards, women are going to just be like you. All women, they're looking for more of a glamorous life. And I've always felt a great deal of guilt that I felt I should have stayed rather than allowing these lawyers to think that to always judge other women by my actions. Do you feel that kind of pressure in a law firm to think about the women who are coming afterwards rather than just doing what you want to do?
Every day. For me, I think I'm very aware of if people can see that I can do it, right? I can transition from associate to partner. That is impactful for the folks that come behind me. And that's not something I don't think I've put on myself. Rather, it's something other junior diverse lawyers have communicated to me. They have communicated, if you can do it, we can do it. We can now see that it can be done. And so while I take a tremendous amount of pride in that, it also is a great weight. But I don't think, for me at least, if I get there and they don't, that is not success. And so I put some of that on myself as well to make sure if I am progressing, I am making sure that there are people in the pipeline who are having a good experience, who are getting the things that they need, and who are on the path to success with me, whatever that might look like for me, them, whomever is on that path. There is a path that they can walk.
I'm wondering if you all have either a book or something that you've read or something that helped you as a lawyer, getting through your life, whatever, anything that you think has helped you that you could share with people who are listening. And I'll go to you, Sally. Anything that really helped you through the years?
I wish I could say I did, but I'll tell you what, when I was, especially in the early parts of my career, I did very little reading. For example, I didn't have any, I wasn't always reading books and that kind of thing. And I sort of missed that. Plus, I was not in an age where there were mentors at all. I really didn't have mentors the way we do now. Thank heavens there are mentors. So I wish I could point to something, but honestly, I cannot.
Ruth, is there any book, anything that you would recommend? Yeah, I know it's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say instead, maybe this is a little bit some of what Janae was saying, is that there were women who gave me a hand up. You know, even though there weren't a lot of us, there were women who gave me a hand up. Some of them were my classmates at Harvard Law School and had gone into teaching before me. In one case, someone was a professor I'd had on a visiting basis. So there were people, even in that very small world that I was trying to succeed in, who gave me a hand up. And I do think that there are lots of people who we can give a hand up to also. It's that personal stuff, right? It's being able to find someone who you can honestly share what's happening uncensored, and they'll try to give you some advice because they care about you, not because they're competing with you, which is obviously the worst kind of relationship to have with someone. And so I just think that we all need to think, and I think about that every day as a law professor starting class next week. You know, what can I do to be giving a hand up to my students who most need that hand up? You know, I think that's sort of the question of the day right now as we think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement. And I know we all care about that, and you do, Erin. That's part of why you're doing this today, so thank you. But so that's not quite the right answer maybe, but it's what's helped me.
And Janae, I mean, you didn't have a lot of role models. Was there anything, where'd you get all that grit? You just born with it? You get it from your mom? I mean, it's just like, was there something that helped you? Because you've had to really do this. It's been harder for you. You didn't have like a whole list of people in your family who've gone to college saying, oh yeah, when I did this. You had to kind of do this on your own.
So I will say first, my mom is actually logged in and listening right now. So yes, a lot of that came from her. And then to answer kind of the book or resource question, there is a book out called The Memo, and it's written by a woman by the name of Minda Harts. And it is coined as the lean-in book for women of color. And for me, the first time I read it, I said, man, I wish I would have had this earlier. I wish I would have been able to read this earlier and get some of these concepts kind of drilled in maybe 5 years, you know, when I was a first year at Dinsmore. So I have actually started giving that book to any woman of color who comes into the law firm, and anyone in my, you know, circle of folks that I might mentor. There's great content in there. You don't have to be a woman of color to benefit from the book. There's an entire chapter in there on allyship and sponsorship and how others can support. And so I think it is a great read, and one I'd encourage folks that are listening to pick up a copy and read.
And one more time on the name, and then we'll wrap up. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Memo,
The Memo.
by Minda Hart.
I want to thank all three of you. You have no idea how many more questions I wanted to ask. Maybe we'll be able to do something like this again in the future, but I want to thank Sally and Ruth and Janae. I wish I were with you in person. I would like to be able to spend more time talking to you, but thank you very much for being here today. And I do want people to know who are listening, I am very available. I get kids from Ohio State, not really kids, but they're teenagers from Ohio State who will reach out to me, LinkedIn, or, and I am available for advice and just being a person who's been around a long time. So thanks all for being here. Thank you.